continuing in this month of May to speak to my beloved parishioners of Presentation Parish about the apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary at Fatima. We've done 3 of them and there are 3 to go. Last time I spoke about the apparition in July, and that was the famous one where Our Lady really showed the children the serious consequences of sin, war and punishment for sin. However, in August, Our Lady allowed the children, you might say, to experience themselves the serious consequences of sin because they suffered very much kind of a persecution from the local governor who was very anti-Catholic at that time. In the years right before the apparition in Portugal, there were many who were kind of plotting against the church. There was a real struggle between the church leaders and some of the government leaders. For example, there was this man, I have his picture here, not because he's one of the saints, he wasn't exactly a saint, but this man is Arturo dos Oliveira Santos, who was the mayor of the local community and a regional administrator at that time, and he was an ex-Catholic, and he was a high-ranking Mason, and he and others were really persecuting the church in a real way, and so when these apparitions started happening, this fellow was being pressured by his superiors, and he himself was really trying to get the children to deny their story. And also, since the children spoke about a secret, he was really trying to get them to say these things, to tell him these secrets. And so this administrator, Dos Santos, had spoken sternly to the children several times, telling them not to go back to the place of the apparitions. But then on the day of the apparitions, it turned out there was a huge crowd going there. 15,000 people, almost 15,000 people came to the Cova de Aria. And Arturo dos Santos kind of intercepted the children, and he tried to get them to stop and not to go, but then he seemed to change his mind and he said, okay, I will escort you, I will drive you in my car through the crowd to get to the place. And so the children reluctantly accepted, but then what happened was he began driving in the opposite direction, and the children realized that they were being fooled and taken to his office at the jail. So when 12 o'clock noon came around and the crowds began to hear rumors that the children had been kidnapped, the crowd started to get angry and to react, but then they were quieted suddenly by a thunderclap, this tremendous sound of thunder, and it seemed to some of them like it was the end of the world, this thunder, and then it was followed by a brilliant flash of light, which is kind of extraordinary because normally in nature, of course, right, you get the lightning flash and then the sound comes after, but here it was the opposite. So this was a real indication of something miraculous. Well, the entire crowd saw, as usual, this kind of luminous white cloud descend from the east, and it hovered over the holm oak tree for a brief time and then went back up into heaven. So it's a kind of interesting detail that Our Lady obviously knew that the children were not going to be there, but for the sake of the crowd, perhaps it's very interesting that this image of Our Lady coming to the place and keeping her appointment with the children and being disappointed and going back up into heaven. At the same time, the children, of course, were in the office of the administrator. And this administrator, Dos Santos, was getting very frustrated with these children that they would not deny their story or reveal the secrets, and he began to really yell and to threaten them. And at one point he said to the other guards who were there, he said, "They will be imprisoned until they give up the secret. And if they take too long, they will be boiled in oil." So this horrible threat was certainly something very frightening for the children, but it was getting late, and the children were then given a meal to eat, and then they were locked in a room overnight. And the next day, the children were again interrogated and questioned. They were separated and threatened. And during all of this, the littlest one, Jacinta, the youngest, she began to cry. But she said later that it wasn't so much because she felt scared from the threats. It was rather that she kind of felt abandoned by her parents. She had been away all night from her parents, and she felt that they had, kind of forgotten or they weren't bothering about them. And Francisco, her brother, consoled her. He said, "Don't cry. We can offer this to Jesus for sinners." And then Francisco looked up to heaven and prayed. He said, "Oh my Jesus, this is for love of you and for the conversion of sinners." And then Jacinta also added, she said, "And also for the Holy Father, and in reparation for sins committed against the Immaculate Heart of Mary." Well, the children were put then into a prison cell with other criminals, and the criminals actually tried to console these little children, and they tried to tell them that actually what they should do is tell the secret to the governor, and so that they could be freed, and that it didn't matter. But Jacinta, the littlest, she said, "Never. I'd rather die." Jacinta then also was the one who initiated some prayer. She had a little medal of Our Lady, and she asked one of the prisoners to pin it or nail it to the wall of the prison cell. And the children knelt down there in front of this little image, and they began to pray the rosary. And before too long, the prisoners also were joining in. They were probably all Portuguese Catholics, and they prayed the rosary with these little children, who they had certainly heard about already with all of the story of the apparitions. Also, while they were in the prison cell, one of the prisoners began to play some music, and they all started singing. It was like a little concertina, a little sort of trying to cheer up the children. And one of them actually, Jacinta, the youngest, she loved to dance, and one of the prisoners danced with her, in fact. But she was so small, the prisoner, he was apparently a thief. He was a criminal who had stolen things. And Lucia, years later, she said he was a poor thief who, finding her so tiny, picked her up and went on dancing with her in his arms. A little later, one of the guards threatened them, the children, again, and told them that a vat of boiling oil was being prepared for them. And then they were taken once again to the administrator's office, and this time they were told they were going to be given one last chance to tell the secret. Well, the children then once again were interrogated individually. And once again, the administrator, Dos Santos, he threatened that if they didn't tell the secret, that they would be brought into the other room and boiled in oil. Well, when they refused, the youngest, Jacinta, was the first to be taken out of the room, dragged out of the room, and the other two children were very fearful, of course. But Francisco, again, was very brave, and he tried to comfort Lucia. He had this sort of joy and peace about him all the time. And he told Lucia, "If they kill us, as they say, we'll soon be in heaven. How wonderful! Nothing else matters. God grant that Jacinta won't be afraid." And he said that he started saying a Hail Mary for Jacinta. And the administrator, Dos Santos, he asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I am saying a Hail Mary so that Jacinta will not be afraid." Well, then the guard came back into the room and announced that Jacinta was dead. And then Francisco, the next youngest, was then threatened, and he was told that if he didn't tell the secret, that he would be also boiled. And Francisco shook his head no, and he too was led out of the room, practically dragged out of the room. And then the administrator, Santos, was alone with Lucia, and he began to really threaten her, to yell at her. And then finally Lucia also was given the chance to tell the secret, and she also shook her head, and she too was dragged out. And she said later, years later, that she said, "I fully expected to be boiled alive." Well, when she got into the other room, to her joy, she saw that the other two children were alive and that they were there in the other room. Well, Arturo dos Santos realized that he was getting nowhere and he wasn't going to be able to convince these children to deny their story or to reveal the secrets. And so eventually he put the children into his car and drove them to the village, and he left them off at the steps of the rectory, of the house of the priests. And by that time, it was August 15th, the feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So, obviously, the apparition of Our Lady of Fatima in August did not occur on the 13th. It happened a couple of days later, but the interesting thing is that somehow Our Lady allowed these children to suffer this terrible suffering and all this fear, and but it was all over, and they were freed from prison on the feast of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Well, a couple of days later, there was an apparition of Our Lady of Fatima in the month of August for the children, and it was on August 19th. Lucia and Francisco were watching their sheep in a place about a mile from their village called Valinhos. It was near a place where the angel had appeared to them the previous year, and they were there watching their sheep, and when suddenly they began to see the flashes of light that usually happen before Our Lady appeared. And so Lucia told there was a young boy named John, one of the brother of Francisco, who was there with them, and Lucia begged John to run to the village and get Jacinta so that she would be there for the apparition. She wasn't there. And the boy at first didn't want to, but finally Lucia had to beg him, and finally he went. And then when Jacinta arrived, that is when the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared, again over a small oak tree. As usual, Lucia began by asking, "What do you want of me?" And Our Lady gave a similar response. "Come again to the Cova da Iria on the 13th of next month, my child, and continue to say the rosary every day. In the last month, I will perform a miracle so that all may believe." Next, Lucia asked a question about the donations that were being left at the place of the apparitions. She said, "What are we to do with the offerings of money that people leave at the Cova da Iria?" That's nice that Lucia already understood the importance of accountability and transparency. And Our Lady's response is very interesting, especially when you understand the culture of Catholic Portugal and Europe at the time, and how the people had put great value and emphasis on supporting the church, on building churches. Our Lady wanted a church to be built on that place, and also obedience, being docile to authority, asking what should be done. And then, once again, Our Lady speaks of Our Lady of the Rosary without telling really who she was. She already is beginning to tell the children about Our Lady of the Rosary. So Our Lady directed them. She said, "I want to have 2 arbors." Those were like platforms that were used to carry statues, and people put donations and flowers on these platforms. "I want you to have 2 ardors made for the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary. I want you and Jacinta to carry one of them with 2 other girls. You will both dress in white. And then I want Francisco with 3 boys helping him to carry the other one. The boys too will be dressed in white. What is left over will help toward the construction of a chapel that is to be built here." Then Our Lady's face once again became sad as she spoke of the seriousness of sin and the importance of praying for sinners. She said, pray a lot, and offer sacrifices for the sinners. You know that many souls go to hell because there is no one to pray for them. Then the apparition ended as usual, with Our Lady rising slowly into the sky on a white, shining cloud. But after this apparition at Molinos, the children broke little branches off of that holm oak tree that was there, and the branches began to exude this beautiful heavenly fragrance, a smell. And when they brought them into the village, others also could smell it. And there was a young lady, a friend of theirs named Maria Rosa, who was very skeptical about the apparitions, but when she smelled the branches, that was what convinced her finally to believe the story of the children. Well, I hope that all of you who are sheltering at home are blessed by our Lord and Our Lady, and that somehow you're able to have faith and hope. And that perhaps in this month of May, Our Lady will comfort us and console us and visit us. And I hope that in this month of May that Our Lady will somehow comfort you and console you and perhaps visit you somehow. You know, I can remember when I was at college at Chico State University, one of the things that convinced me of the truth of our faith was thinking about that fact that Our Lady at any time could appear to me wherever I was. And I pray that in this month of May that all of you, all of us in our homes, in our families will feel the comfort and consolation of Our Lady, and that somehow she will visit you too. You know, I can remember when I was in college studying at Chico State University, one of the things that converted me or brought me back to the faith at that time was that thought that, you know, the Blessed Virgin Mary could appear to me at any moment, in any place, wherever I was. And so I pray that Our Lady will be with us and that she will comfort and visit and console each of you during this difficult time. God bless you, and happy Easter season.